right, we're joined now by creator of Basketball She Wrote, a returnee. Welcome back to Basketball Illuminati, Caitlin Cooper. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I was actually thinking before I hopped on here that the last time I was on this show was when the Pacers were in the middle of kind of trading off their entire roster. And both of you asked me, like, if the Pacers trade Sabonis, what would you be hoping they get back in return? And I said, they're going to need a top-tier point guard. And as it turns out,
wow,
that's what they got. And that's what they needed.
And that is an incredible shot. Nice job by you, Caitlin. I speaking of calls, you just said on social media, you just posted about 56 minutes ago. Somehow Pacers Knicks is already exhausting and it hasn't even started yet. So let's talk about Pacers Knicks. I'm sorry, but you know, this is how we do it in the media, where this has been a long layoff between the series. So why is it so exhausting for you, Caitlin?
Somehow we're already preemptively talking about referees and whether this series will be rigged on one hand, and on the other hand, we're also retroactively debating whether the Pacers legitimately won the series last year, whether they legitimately have advanced this year, how much the injuries have impacted them. And I'm like, to me, this isn't the same Knicks team as last year. This isn't the same Pacers team as last year. I don't know that I find that all that relevant. But hey.
What's the biggest difference between the Pacers last year and the Pacers this year?
Midway through the season, after they lost all of their in-season tournament games, and a complete opposite from the year before when they were the darlings of the in-season tournament, right. They had 4 days of practice off. And those 4 days, I think, were pretty crucial to turning their season around. And they also got all of their roster back healthy, and specifically their point of attack defenders. Andrew Nembhard was no longer on a minutes restriction. He's their most important guy on the defensive end. So I think the biggest difference for this Pacer team is the strides that they made defensively, and that since that date, they've been top 8 offense and defense.
Do you like, Caitlin, that you guys are you're covering a team that are now in the Eastern Conference Finals again, where the underdog label, where the national media hasn't been on top of the Indiana Pacers' rise? Do you find that the fan base is like kind of annoyed with the lack of national media this season and want to continue being the underdog? Or do they want to be considered like championship contenders with the rest of the NBA? Like they want to be in that top tier title contention, or do they want to continue to be doubted? Like, what's your sense on the Indiana Pacers fan base?
I mean, it's probably somewhat a mixed bag. I mean, I know that the tweet went around where every expert was wrong on the picks for both the Pacers series and the Knicks series, and that certainly got publicized. Oh, these are the experts, quote unquote. I'm like, well, that's why we play the games, because none of us really knows what's going to happen. But I think that the Pacer fan base over the years, every time that they've been in the Eastern Conference Finals, prefers going back to the 2 back-to-backs against Miami to now, likes it when they're overlooked and when they get to prove people wrong. Kind of like Tyrese going to the podium. It's kind of an extension of that, overrate that. I think that kind of fits with the Pacers fan base vibe as well.
Why do you think Tyrese Haliburton is so underrated or considered overrated by the players?
The word is polarizing, Tom. Why is he so polarizing?
I think there's a number of reasons, probably. I think that some of the fan bases, what gets thrown out there a lot is about being a front runner, which is kind of funny because he's almost ultimately elite at snatching victory out of the jaws of defeat when you really think about it. Like, there's not a lot of front running going on when you're down 7 and you come back in 40 seconds twice in the same playoff run. But I also think, like, something that I point out a lot is that he's almost kind of a basketball counterculture in a lot of ways. His shot doesn't look the way that it's supposed to. I did a whole breakdown several years ago about the effectiveness of when he jumps, when he passes. We're told not to do that. He can sometimes be like negative space in art. He doesn't take a lot of shots, and then people be like, that's not what a star's supposed to do. How is this working effectively for the Indiana Pacers? And so because there are some of those kind of preconceived ideas about basketball in general, and he beats against those, when it ends up in the other way, there ends up being backlash a lot of times because what he does shouldn't work, and yet somehow it does work fairly often for the Pacers.
Caitlin, when you think about what the journey of growth that Rick Carlisle has undergone since first getting Haliburton to now, what's been the biggest I think, change or area of growth you've seen?
That's a great question, because going back to when I was on the show the last time with that previous core that would have been Malcolm Brogdon, Karis LeVert, Sabonis, Turner, when you watch broadcasts or when you were in the arena, you could hear him doing a lot of pace control and play calling from the sidelines. Like, you could literally hear him at the end of games being like, hold it, wanting to optimize possessions, get people in the right spots, some micromanaging going on. And I remember the very first game that I watched Tyrese play for the Pacers when they played against the Cavs, like 3 things popped where I was like, he wants to play at a very fast pace. Like, he's clapping for inbound passes, even off of makes. He wants to turn the ball downhill. I was like, how's this going to mesh? Because Rick hadn't coached a lot of fast-paced teams. And some of that's because of the type of player that Luka Doncic is versus the type of player that Tyrese Haliburton is. But would he relinquish some of that? And he has. Like, I mean, he unlocked it. He helped them build out the type of identity that they had based on the players that they have on the roster. He's adjusted that, and there's a lot less play calling. He prefers not to do it. They want to play random offense as much as possible. So, I mean, I think that's probably the biggest difference that I've noticed just tactically from him.
Yeah, what is it about Tyrese Haliburton that makes him such a good clutch performer, in your opinion? Because Dean Oliver just posted that he is the second best clutch performer, regular season plus postseason this year. And for a guy who has gotten a lot of hate for his play and for his antics or whatever, most overrated player in the league allegedly, to come up big in those big moments, what is it about the way he plays that allows him to rise to that level? And it can't just be just shot making, like he's hit a bunch of lucky shots.
Some of it is shot making, though. I mean, because the one thing that I'll point out is when he was dealing with the hamstring injury last year over the back half of the season, and it was something that he talked about, and it was something that I tracked, that 2 elements of his game kind of changed, because he's somebody as a right-handed shooter who wants to step back to his right. Like, that was his preferred methodology, but he couldn't power off his left leg to do that anymore. So it was impacting his three-point percentage pretty heavily over the second half because he was having to adapt and adjust to that. And to a certain extent, injury was almost the mother of invention for him. Like, he had to adjust. So now when you watched him make that shot against the Cleveland Cavaliers after they got that offensive rebound, which direction did he step back against Jarrett Allen? To his left.
To the left.
Other things too, like he prefers to gather low and squirt through the help. Like, that's what he would do when he was trying to beat it. You can't do that when you can't lunge deep into that hamstring. So now when he's defended by smaller guards and he's being face guarded, he had to adapt to what type of gathers he had. So now it's, he'll do a windmill to get over the top of smaller guards. Like, certain things, the injury almost made him a better player despite how much he struggled over the back half of that season. So to an extent, like, it is boring, but some of it is shot making and his shot making versatility that he's able to get to in those moments that he wasn't having access to as much prior to when that happened.
He's probably going to see Mikal Bridges a lot in the opening matchups. How's he done against Bridges this season?
The first game, it was rough. I think he had a total of 4 drives against the New York Knicks in Madison Square Garden, but he did not remotely look like himself by my eye. I think in tandem, when he had the 30-point game at home in the fourth quarter, the pick-and-roll coverages between Bridges and Karl-Anthony Towns were quite poor. Mathurin, Haliburton, and Turner combined for almost 100 points, just the 3 of them. And they were moving Karl-Anthony Towns around a lot. It was like, okay, well, Miles Turner's made 2 threes in a row now out of the pick and pop, so let's go put him on Siakam. And the Pacers are very they're magnanimous in that the players in that starting lineup are very willing to be like, oh, this is a good matchup for you. I'm going to go get out of the way. So Miles Turner's like, I'll just go space in the strong side corner. They start screening with Pascal Siakam instead. Like, sometimes they might have 20 screens from Pascal Siakam in a game. He might lead them in that, and then Karl-Anthony Towns was having to guard in that spot as well. So I honestly think it might have a little bit more to do with what pick and roll coverages the Knicks employ. Obviously, they went to a lot more switching against the Celtics than what they were doing in the regular season. I still think switch is probably the best method against the Pacers, even though they've improved at that in the playoffs through to this point. But I think a lot more of it's probably going to depend on Towns, even more so than Bridges.
We saw in the Denver series how Alex Caruso kind of changed Game 7 by being a guarding Nikola Jokic. Who do you see guarding Karl-Anthony Towns? Because Jason Tatum was the primary guarder for much of that series against Boston. Do you see a similar, not necessarily a guard defending Karl-Anthony Towns, but trying to go smaller?
Yeah, that's what I wrote my whole series preview about, because I think that's quite possibly the most interesting point of this series, because in the 3 regular season games, the Pacers were the rare team that unilaterally defended him with a center. It was all Miles Turner, Isaiah Jackson, Thomas Bryant, or Obi Toppin when Obi Toppin was at the 5, which isn't what most teams do. As you just said, it's usually a wing on Karl-Anthony Towns. I won't be surprised if the Pacers start that way, because they might value being able to put Tyrese Haliburton on Josh Hart, which is who they've particularly had there. Although, as I just said, that last season's matchup doesn't matter. It does in this extent, because they adjusted midway through the series and put Nesmith onto Brunson, which mattered, but it mattered more so because Siakam and Andrew Nembhard were helping off of Achua and Josh Hart, which allowed Nesmith to press closer to Jalen Brunson. Those same guardrails aren't necessarily going to be there when the Knicks are playing more of a 5-out lineup, especially if you're putting Tyrese on Josh Hart. So I can see my way through the middle of the series when you're asking who it would be, that my eye is on Aaron Nesmith. Nesmith started at the 4 for the Pacers a couple years ago. There's a reason why he no longer starts at the 4 for the Pacers. But I do think that they have that in their back pocket, where I really like the idea of Nembhard pressures the ball in the backcourt, which he's one of the best pressure guards in the NBA. Then you're avoiding foul trouble with Nesmith in the backcourt. When the screen comes from Karl-Anthony Towns, the longer defender, Nesmith, switches back onto Brunson. Miles is on Josh Hart, scrams out Nembhard from Karl-Anthony Towns. Nembhard goes to the corner against Hart. And more so than anything, in the numbers that I looked at and had access to, like, most of the time when a wing is on Karl-Anthony Towns, he's not as involved in the offense. Like, it's almost a preemptive check on him, because more often the Knicks are like, we're going to run pick and roll between Brunson and Hart because we still want to get the 5-man in the action. Cats averaged 30 and 12 against the Pacers during the regular season. If they can just get him fewer touches, to me, that's a win for them. So I think that the cross match makes sense, but we'll see if they're willing to do that right out of the gate, game 1. And I don't like it as much with Pascal Siakam. I'm sure people are listening to this and being like, why wouldn't you do it with Pascal? He has even more length and he could probably guard Towns a little bit better. Siakam can have some trouble with screen navigation. So if he has to switch out onto Jalen Brunson and the Knicks are like, hey, we'll just bring Bridges, and now Tyrese is the screener defender of Bridges, and now we got inverted pick and roll, that could get dicey quick for the Pacers in that regard. So I like it a little bit better with Nesmith.
You mentioned Andrew Nembhard. How do you explain what happens to this guy in the postseason, particularly the shooting? I mean, like, a tough defensive player, that's kind of his deal. He's a smart player. He's a high IQ player. But it's like when someone shot sub 30% for the span of how many of the 82 he played, and then you're like 50% in the playoffs, that's got to be frustrating for an opposing defense. Like, what's happening here?
It's kind of wild, because last year I thought it was possible that there would be some playoff progression, simply because he had the kidney stone at the beginning of training camp. Then he hyperextended his knee. Then he had a back issue, and I could see spots where that was affecting him. And I thought, with the amount of work that they talked about, that Jenny Busick and his trainer went into simplifying his shot mechanics, I'm like, this might come around a little bit in the playoffs. But the fact that there was like the regression during the regular season, and now it's not even just that he's knocking down like open catch and shoots off Tyrese's gravity. Like, his pull-up volume is up to over 2 a game, and he's shooting like 50% on those. Yeah. I mean, I think number 1, 2, and 3 on jump shots and effective field goal percentage in these playoffs is Nesmith, Turner, and Nembhard right now. So Nembhard's a little bit harder to explain. Like, I don't really know how you just all of a sudden develop a pull-up 3 when you really barely even attempted any of those during the regular season. I mean, I think he's an extremely valuable player. I would value him even if the shooting wasn't there, and the Pacers are clever with him at times too, where they'll put him in the dunker spot. They like inverted spacing, where they'll put Turner in the strong side, but certainly that's been a massive development, especially with how much he's been running pick and roll when you think about it. Because like in the Cavs series, he ran more pick and roll than Tyrese did. Like, they really preferred running 4-on-4 with how much Tyrese was getting face guarded. So the fact that he can hit that pull-up 3 and he's not seeing as many unders, it matters.
He had more assists than Tyrese in that series, and he had a similar number of turnovers, like very low. Mm-hmm. Is that more Nembhard, or is that the system that Carlisle runs, that both Tyrese and Nembhard can be so good at creating shots for others without coughing up the ball?
Yeah, Tyrese I've turned him as the immaculate exception. I don't know how somebody has such difficult pass difficulty and barely turns over the ball while playing at breakneck speed. It's really boggling to me. With regard to Nembhard, I mean, I think that Nembhard's been a little bit underrated just as a pick and roll operator in general, and the shooting's opened that up a little bit more because you're able to see his passing come to life. And he and Miles were one of the top pick and roll combinations in the NBA so far in the playoffs by the middle of that series. But I think a lot of it goes back to what I said. Like, when I talk about Tyrese being like negative space and art, when he can stand on the logo and Okoro or Max Strus is face guarding him and not even paying attention to what the other four people are doing, playing 4-on-4 with that much extra space makes it easier to run the pick and roll and be picking up those assists. So, like I said, they're very magnanimous in terms of Tyrese is okay with, I don't have to be the person taking tons of shots, and I can wait to the second half and I can become a screener and I can get loose in other ways, and let's establish this first. So I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, the crazy thing is what Tyrese's shooting is the one that suffers, or has suffered, I should say, during this postseason. What's that? What do you attribute that to? And is that something that's correctable, or is it just a factor of volume and the intensity of the playoffs?
I mean, it definitely came around in Game 6 against the Cavs. That was good to see. Yeah. His shot flurry is kind of what ended up turning that game. But it is funny because they do have the top 3-point percentage in the playoffs, and I think he has the lowest among the starters right now. I think the other four are all close to 40, and he's at 33. So some of that might be the exaggerated coverage, and it also might be that teams know that there's incentives to weak him left a lot. And while he has adjusted and is willing to step back to his left, that, again, isn't his natural preferred movement pattern. And teams are forcing him left actively in these playoffs. So that could be part of it. I haven't looked at the exact numbers to see where the drop-off has been completely.
I did some research here, and I should have shared this with Amin because I feel like he just preempted me. But I'm going to do it anyway. There are 157 active players, Caitlin, who have played at least 5,000 regular season minutes and at least 750 minutes in the postseason. 5,750. The threshold gets guys like Christian Brown and Gabe Vincent in there, just to give you an idea of what level of player we're talking here. Of those 157 active players, which player raised their career win shares per 48 minutes the most from regular season to postseason? And Amin already gave the answer. So
Andrew Nembhard?
Andrew Nembhard. Yeah. Yeah.
That was easy. Who's team?
Yeah. Stole my thunder there. Thanks. Amin there. Why does that guy raise his impact in the postseason so much? You're kind of already hit on it, but is it a matter of the regular season, they're not optimizing him as much because it's a long season and maybe they're keeping things kind of just trying to keep guys healthy or what have you, role injuries? Or is there something else about this dude that you've noticed that he's just so much better when the playoffs come?
I mean, there are certainly teams during the regular season, especially at the beginning portion, who are using exaggerated coverages against Tyrese to try to slow the pace down, and that was affecting them. But not every team every night's doing that during the regular season. Every team every night's showing Tyrese exaggerated coverages, so Nembhard, more of the offense is tilting to him, more of the easier reps are tilting to him to an extent. But defensively, he's not going to be named to an all-defensive team because he's not eligible to be. But I think he's defended at an all-defensive level for the majority of this season. I think he's been their most impactful defender for 2 seasons now. And that probably would have been a little bit of a hot take last year. But if you look at the numbers about how effective he is in contain, and ironically, this is partially why the Brunson assignment isn't as good for him, because he's very good in contain and cutting off drives, but then doesn't always have the length and isn't quite as ambitious as Nesmith as an on-ball defender to be covering up the amount of separation that Brunson creates. But he's very good in that regard. He's also incredibly high feel. So he's the type of person who can apply, 800 pounds of pressure on the ball, but it's the technique that I've talked about and that I've even made a t-shirt about, that he's one of the only players in the NBA that I've ever seen be able to pull the chair on a drive. Like, we talk about pulling the chair in a post-up when it's a static action. He pulls the chair on drives. Like, Donovan Mitchell fell down twice because he anticipates the bump. Like, all these players want to use an off-ball arm. Like, I've seen Shai Gilgeous fall on the ground because Nembhard's anticipating when the bump comes. He pulls back off of it. I've seen Zach LaVine airball layups against him. Like, he's just very high feel and being able to process those types of things, and he's also their best off-ball defender. Like, I won't be surprised if some of the motivation, in addition to Nesmith's size and putting, if Nesmith starts out opposite of Brunson, is because Nembhard's so good, jump switching, anticipating off-ball rotations before they happen. He's very impactful in that regard too. So I know that there's been a pretty big swing net rating for them defensively, along with Siakam when he's on the floor. So I think it's just all of that coalescing, in addition to I must admit, I can't fully explain why the pull-up shooting has become a thing from 3-point range, but all of it has seemed to be working for him all at the same time.
Well, here's some other names on this list, top 5. So just for posterity, Andrew Nembhard, 0.05 win shares per minute per 48 minutes in the regular season, and in the postseason that basically triples to 0.139. So the percentage difference is 173% increase. Jordan Poole is at number 2. Jordan Poole. Anthony Edwards is at number 3. Jordan Poole is at number 2. And I guess when you look at that 2022 playoff run, the championship run, he was unbelievable.
And also his regular season has been so bad that it makes it even bigger disparity. It's just
that's crazy. Like if I just came out with Jordan Poole, the biggest playoff riser, I'd be like, you can just toss this out. But when Nembhard and Anthony Edwards are at top 3, I would also point out Bruce Brown is at number 5 on that list. Former Indiana Pacer, and as well as Jaden McDaniels. So 3 of the top 4 playoff risers are still alive in the postseason. And at the bottom, this is kind of last week we had Roland Beach on the show, Caitlin, and he talked about his physicality rating.
Yeah.
And at he did like a ranking, Caitlin, of the most physical players in the postseason that he has watched over the last couple of years, and the least physical guys. The least physical guy in his Roland Beach physicality per 48-minute rating is D'Angelo Russell. And sure enough, at the bottom of this list, the biggest playoff decliners, D'Angelo Russell. So physicality is, I think, probably indicative of some sort of playoff, I don't know, secret sauce, that if you're willing to be physical, you are going to excel in an environment that is more physical. And on that note, Indiana Pacers, I think, are majority of the time way more physical than the Cleveland Cavaliers and Milwaukee Bucks. So how do you think that plays into this series? I know we already talked about how annoying the referee conversation is, but we saw OKC just bully the Denver Nuggets, who have won a championship and have their core and continuity and have had that postseason experience way over the head of OKC. But they were very physical in Game 7 and ran away with it. How do you think that physicality, the thing that everyone talks about, we pointed this out on the show months ago. What is the physicality rating for Caitlin Cooper in this series? Like, where do you think it's going to be?
I think it manifests itself in different ways for both teams. Because a year ago, the Pacers had more possessions of press in the playoffs than any team in Synergy's database. And they're better at playing press now. So I anticipate that, given that the Knicks have played a 7-man rotation, that they're going to be basically pressuring the heck out of the ball, especially anytime Brunson brings it up. They'll probably do it even if those ball handling reps get sent over to Josh Hart as well. So that is kind of the predominant way that the Pacers are a physical basketball team, is with their willingness to, I mean, there's times, like if you guys watch the games in Paris, Miles Turner was picking up Wemby full court. Like, they will have the bigs up at half court if they need to be. So that's kind of where it manifests for the Pacers, and I'll be interested to see how the Knicks counter for that, because sometimes they're so physical that they'll go overboard with overs on screens at like 3/4 court. So we'll see if, Cat's bringing screens up that high and Brunson's rejecting screens. He and Tyrese reject screens more than about anybody, how that manifests against the Pacers defense. But on the Knicks side, I'm pretty interested to see, almost the most interesting player for them in this series to me is Mitchell Robinson, because of how effective he just was against Boston on the offensive glass. The glass as a whole for the Pacers. And if they're having to send, like I've talked about it many times, the best way to limit the pace for the Pacers is not sending everybody back, which is Doc Rivers' preference for a long, long time now. He doesn't want to send multiple players, sometimes even one player, to the offensive glass if they're not in the paint. If you can send multiples and they have to stay and box out, then that limits their pace. And also, like, if you're having to send 2 people to crash and smash on Robinson, that opens up offensive rebounding opportunities for other guys on the floor, like Josh Hart, who's probably the best wing offensive rebounder in the NBA. And it also kind of limits what type of coverages you can play. It's much harder to double Jalen Brunson or Karl-Anthony Towns if you're not a great defensive rebounding team, because you might give up, offensive rebounds from that coverage. The Pacers do dabble in zone at times. It's much harder to play zone if they feel like they need to, if you're having weaknesses on the offensive glass. So I'm kind of interested to see, like, in that regards with, physicality, Mitchell Robinson, probably one of their most physical players. How does he hang? Like, does the offensive rebounding tilt so in favor of the Knicks that he ends up playing more? Or does the pace tilt so in favor of the Pacers that it makes it harder for the Knicks to potentially play some of the double big lineups that have been successful for them in the playoffs?
Yeah, Caitlin, because during the playoffs, the Pacers, I think, are the second worst team in terms of giving up points off of offensive rebounds. During the regular season, it was nothing to write home about either. They were bottom half of the league there as well. And Mitchell Robinson, Coach Mazzulla was talking about this guy was the difference maker, and they tried to employ the hack a Shaq to get him off the floor because they just felt like that gave him a better chance. Do you see the Pacers doing the same thing, trying to get him off the floor, or is it the opposite? Like you said, when you send two to the glass, or when you're sending to the glass, that opens up opportunities for the opposite, for the transition play.
I don't think that Rick Carlisle will be above going to Haka. I've seen them employ that against certain opponents. Like when Jakob Poeltl was still in San Antonio, I believe there was a game that he played against the Pacers where he had 17 free throw attempts. So if they're having a really bad rebounding game, I could see them trying to go to it. I guess it would depend what lineups he's out there against, because part of me thinks it would be successful for the Knicks to try to go double big when it's like Obi Toppin and Miles Turner, because that's not going to be their best rebounding lineup necessarily, or especially if they went smaller with Obi at the 5. But then the other part of me is like, well, but could you keep up with them? So I'm really going to be like, that's one of the most fascinating things to me about this series is whether that can play out, especially, that the Knicks are playing a 7-man rotation too. And not only a 7-man rotation, but I would like to see the data on this, because it seems to me like it's not rapid substitutions with the 7-man rotation either. Like sometimes the groups that are out there for very extended periods all at the same time before they're bringing a sub. So it's not like it's constantly 2 people in, 2 people out to be able to maintain fresh legs. So I'm very confident that 2 things from Rick Carlisle is going to be harping on the rebounding nonstop. This is a team that's been known to do rebounding drills at practice because it's enough of a weakness for them at times, which is kind of unheard of. And then also like pace. I'm sure you're going to be hearing that from the sidelines, especially when the bench unit comes in, is going to be, hoping that they can wear on the Knicks by playing deeper, because they have been playing, 10, 11 deep even in the playoffs in some of these games.
What did you learn from the Boston Celtics attack on the New York Knicks? Is there anything you can pull from that series, and what worked with the Celtics and what might be a blueprint or a page out of the book for Rick Carlisle?
I think Game 5 was telling, and this is not me trying to throw dirt on Jason Tatum by any means, but when Tatum wasn't available anymore, the Celtics had to play a little bit more like the Pacers. So the Knicks switched more than they ever have in that series, and that was effective for them through the first 4 games. And then in Game 5, it wasn't as many static isolations. I think there was they cut down from 27 to 19 static isolations, and it was the highest pass volume the Celtics had in any game. And the Knicks, with their switching, they looked like a team that hasn't done a lot of switching. Like when ghost screens were involved, when there were stack actions involved, and it was suddenly, it's a triple switch against the stack action, there was a lot of confusion there. And those are core concepts that the Pacers will go to. Like, they don't like to isolate. They're one of the lower isolation teams in the NBA right now. They're averaging 340 passes per 100. So they're going to look at, if Tyrese gets a switch on the perimeter, they're going to set a ghost screen to try to reignite the offense. They like opening double gaps with ghost screens. That's something that the Knicks are going to have to navigate a lot. So I was almost encouraged by that. Their defense did improve in Game 6 at home. Some of it wasn't quite as bad at Madison Square Garden, but this isn't a team that had a lot of reps practicing those types of things, because it wasn't something that Tom Thibodeau tried a lot during the regular season.
Yeah, that pass number, it's the highest passing per game in the postseason since the 2015 San Antonio Spurs. They lost in the first round, but it was I think a carryover from the summertime 2014 win, where the Spurs, when they are moving the ball like that, it's just beautiful basketball. But a lot of coaches, they have a tough relationship with that pass number, because a lot of times high passing teams aren't necessarily indicative of good offense.
Right.
Is that you're searching, and before you know it, you're either going to turn the ball over or you're running up against the shot clock. So how are the Pacers so good at maintaining kind of the basically the high efficiency in that half court offense while passing the ball so much and limiting those turnovers? Like, what is it?
I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with their emphasis on how quickly they get into their first action. So, like, I had a possession during the Cavs series where literally the entire possession, Tyrese was standing in the weak side corner being face guarded by Okoro, and he had his hands on his knees, like almost in the universal sign of decoy, or I'm just taking a break here. Yeah. And the Pacers ran through 4 different actions with Nembhard as the ball handler, screening actions, and there was still 9 seconds on the shot clock when they got a wide open corner 3 from Obi Toppin. So it's never except sometimes against zone. It's very rarely just like, you know, the quip from Hoosiers, like, you can't shoot until you've taken 4 passes, like the worst strategy of all time. Like, it's not often that. Like, they're usually finding an advantage and maintaining the advantage. They're definitely a team that likes to trigger the extra pass from the corner, and it's generally with a purpose, where they have quite a few high field players that know, like, hey, if this, then this, out of their random offense. So I think it's more so that than, like, I agree with you. Sometimes passing isn't always, you know, a metric for, like, this is a good offensive team. Sometimes it's a we're searching for things type team. The Pacers are usually have a roadmap of where they want to get to.
The most remarkable thing about Benedict Mathurin in his first playoffs is getting ejected for a flagrant 2.
That's true.
Do you think he's going to be more of a factor in this series, or less of a factor, or as much of a non-factor?
Yeah, I mean, I thought Ben had a decent debut, where I felt like the thing with Benedict Mathurin is when you evaluate him with the Pacers is he can kind of be a square peg in a round hole in terms of how, like what I just said, how they want to play random and making quick decisions. He can be catch and hold. He still doesn't make very many live dribble passing reads. He typically has to stop, and sometimes he likes to drive to his left, but he can't make a lot of passing reads with his left. So then it's like, have to turn and do it there, and it could be very rote. So, but he is he can access almost any shot he wants on the court, but he's not really doing either one of those things. Like, he's not being, if he's going to be a square peg in a round hole, then he needs to do some of the square peg things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I thought he was good in the third quarter of the one game against the Cavs, where they ended up pulling off the comeback, where I'm not sure if they would have pulled it back if not for some of the minutes that he contributed with the bench. Otherwise, it has been somewhat unremarkable. Like, he hasn't looked particularly mission critical to the stuff that they're doing, especially by comparison to what Nesmith's doing in the starting spot that Ben had through the middle portion of the series. That being said, given that the Knicks are playing, and I know I've said it many times, but because they are playing a 7-man rotation, Ben's had some success, particularly in the second home game, against this matchup. And I think that one thing that bodes well in his favor is I can see scenarios where Brunson with the starters will likely be guarding Nesmith. There's also a possibility that when Ben plays with the starters, he will be guarded by Brunson as well. Because I don't anticipate that Tom Thibodeau is going to be wanting Jalen Brunson to do a ton of screen navigation guarding Andrew Nembhard, given how much Andrew Nembhard is initiating the offense. So if Mathurin's being guarded by Brunson, that actually gives the Pacers a little bit better chance to poke at that and, you know, guard him by forcing him to guard. So that's one aspect that I like with Mathurin in this series. And also, during the middle portion of the year, part of the reason why he was having a somewhat positive impact defensively was because he was so effective as a defensive rebounder. So if they can get him to level up in that regard and be keeping, you know, Josh Hart and some of those other guys off the glass, that will be a help for them as well. But yeah, it's been somewhat underwhelming so far to this point with Mathurin, I think.
Caitlin, a lot of history between the Knicks and the Pacers. I'm sure you've seen a lot of clips online just going back into history. What player, former Pacer, I'm curious, in your opinion, what former Pacer would get the loudest applause, like standing ovation?
Really?
I know the obvious answer. I know the obvious answer. But he's going to be on the mic.
Haywood Workman. Yeah, that's what it's going to be.
But besides Reggie, like, is there someone that you're kind of hoping to see from the Pacers history that shows up to this series here and lets the audience kind of bask in the glory of that former player with the Pacers?
I mean, we were joking around about it before the show started, but Lance Stevenson came to a playoff game and signed autographs. Like, the fan base loves Lance Stevenson. I'm telling you, he is a cult hero. And especially because of what he did in that game 6 against the Knicks. Also, like, because of Roy Hibbert getting the massive block on Carmelo Anthony, like, if he showed up there and they showed that highlight, that might have an effect.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that block. That was incredible.
My money was on Derek McKee Gonna walk in there, him and Dale Ellis.
Where's Rick Smits these days?
Yeah, where is Rick Smits?
Yeah, he comes to a lot of Pacer games.
Okay. So maybe he's already gotten his flowers. What happens if Paul George shows up?
I look more favorably at Paul George, I think, than the majority of the fan base does. I still think he's one of the greatest players to put on a Pacer uniform. But, there was stuff in the middle of the season when he came with the Sixers, and I guess the Pacers that were running some type of montage that had former Pacer greats in it, and he wasn't included. And then he mentioned that on the podcast, and it kind of turned into a thing where then I think the front office reached out to him and let him know that like they would rectify that, which I mean, I guess, but at the same time, it's like, if you have to be called about this, then do you really care in the future if you're included in the video? Like, I don't know.
What's Travis best up to?
Yeah, I was just gonna say. I mean, you gotta go deep on this. Who else? Who are you most looking forward to seeing if they bring out? Because the Knicks have done a great job of this, just having Knicks legends show up.
You know how like people at protests sometimes are paid to be at the protest. I gotta feel like that's what's happening at Madison Square Garden. There's a little compensation package happening beyond just, hey, you guys want to go to a game? Like, no, there's a little bit more there because I see the excitement. That's not the excitement of, wow, this team is playing really well. That's the, hey man, I'm getting paid to do this. I want these checks to keep coming in. But no, if I were trying to staff a Pacers kind of reunion, Chuck Person definitely got to be one of the people there. I would say. Antonio Davis and Dale Davis.
Yeah.
Let's see. Austin Crozier. He's got to get a call, right? Jalen Rose is available. He was at the Knicks Pistons game. So
but he was on Pistons. I don't know.
He's from Detroit. He's just going to come down. And, who else? I'm trying to think.
J.O.?
I'm missing.
What's J.O. doing?
J.O. is a good one, yeah.
Jermaine O'Neal is my favorite Pacer of all time because I grew up a Pacer fan, and that was the era that I was watching. And, so I also have a connection since Rick's the coach again, and that's who was coaching when the Pacer Piston days were big. But I guess I was kind of more thinking about the players that would have factored more in the actual Knick Pacer rivalry. And that's somewhat of a hole for me because in the 90s when Reggie was part of this, like I was a toddler. So I don't have quite the same connections to those teams. But certainly, like I said, the Roy Hibbert team, George Hill's still very beloved in this area, given that he's from Indiana.
David West?
Yeah, David West is still very well liked in Indiana for everything that he did for those particular teams as well. So those would probably be the guys that I would more so be paying attention to.
Mike Dunleavy Jr. His season's over. He can come on. He can pop on over.
It's wild because I did a piece not that long ago where I looked at the last time Rick coached the Pacers, the 2007 team that Dunleavy was on, because Rick still runs an ATO that he ran clear back then. And it kind of speaks to modern basketball because like you'd be watching Dunleavy like coming off a stagger to hit like a catch and shoot too. And like now like when they're running that exact same play, like the screens are being set so much further from the basket, like the diversity of who will do what within the exact same play. Like sometimes we like the nostalgia problem in the NBA where we're so much like, I want to watch the basketball that was back then. Yeah. You are watching it. It's the exact same choreography. It's just that the spacing and the who's doing what is so much more diverse and optimizing the types of shots that you're getting.
Tom, here's one. Second time in 3 weeks we've mentioned this guy, Troy Murphy.
Yeah.
Little Troy Murphy. Troy Murphy.
He's kind of ahead of his time. Like his defensive rebounding rate with the Pacers and the rate that he was shooting on pick and pops, he would actually be pretty effective now. Just like if Danny Granger was like a power four or a stretch four now versus playing at the small forward like he did for the Pacers whenever he was active. Like
Troy Murphy didn't shoot enough threes. Should have shot more.
Yeah.
As we look back at it, it's like, oh man, like they had him on a leash. He should have been got a lot more attempts. I like this game.
Detlef? We get a little Detlef, a little Mully?
Mully's a good one, yeah. Mully's a good one. Detlef, I don't know how many people remember Detlef from his Indiana days.
Well, I was thinking Jermaine O'Neal and the Blazers, and then I was like, oh, Detlef with the Blazers.
Like the J.O. team is J.O., Steven Jackson, right? Ron Artest.
Yeah, if they brought back that whole team, Meta,
Jamal Tinsley, Al Harrington. Yep. Who else?
That would get
team?
A crazy applause if they brought back that whole team.
Jeff Foster. Like if Jeff Foster was out here, he'd be gobbling up the offensive rebound.
Scott Pollard, get him out there.
Amin, did you see that clip of, I think it was on All the Smoke, when Steven Jackson was like, hey, man, we really, like, I feel bad that we ruined.
Reggie,
he was talking to Reggie.
They apologized to
and
Reggie.
Reggie got all choked up. I was like, yo,
emotional,
someo's cutting onions in here, man. That really hit in the feels. I was like, yo.
That was a lot to handle.
Man.
It is crazy because, I mean, that team was built to win. They had a tough one the year before, but like this was it. This was supposed to be the overcoming of Detroit, and they were that team. And Ron was playing great, and they were complete. They were obviously amazing defensively. They played inside, they played outside, and then it's just like in the blink of an eye, everything is destroyed. It's not just, oh man, there goes that season. It's there goes all of it. And then for Reggie, that was his last year. That makes it even more of a it's not even story. There is no tomorrow, in the words of the great Apollo Creed.
A block from Tayshaun Prince and a cup of beer ruined my childhood.
Sorry to laugh. We'll end on that, Caitlin. That's a great dismount.
Jim.
Caitlin Cooper. You can find her on X, C2. What is it? C2. I get. What is that?
C2 _ Cooper. It's a bad handle. It's redundant, but it is what it is.
C2 _ Cooper and Basketball She Wrote over on Patreon. Thank you so much, Caitlin. And hopefully no one's throwing any beers or Tayshaun Prince isn't playing. So you don't have to worry about that.
Keep the beverages under control, Madison Square Garden.